Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of our Future of Cloud Optimization podcast. Here with me, I have Venkat, who is a leader from Mimecast, and he leads FinOps for them. Welcome, Venkat.
Thank you, Suresh. I'm excited to be part of this podcast. Thanks for having me here.
Perfect. I clearly know that you have a stance on FinOps. Okay, so to start with, I want your 30-second preview on that stance. Like, what do you think of that framework?
For me, FinOps is mostly a journey. So it's no one size fit for all. It depends on how big company you are, where you are, at what point of time you are in. Are you focused more on like releasing your product, or like are you focused on optimizing? For me, the framework is working with different teams, figuring out what's the opportunity for you to optimize things. I'm saying not to cut costs or save costs, but I'm saying optimize things, because optimization leads to cost cutting if needed, right? And the way I approach things is things that have high impact and low effort, things that have high impact but medium effort, and then again, things that have variable impact but a high effort, which could mean like architectural changes and things like that. So then that's the way I categorize like the FinOps framework on how I work with different teams. But it totally depends on the company, where you are in terms of FinOps maturity. Where are you in the cycle for FinOps maturity?
Adding to that, right? So when you categorize between that, is there any way to categorize between simple recommendations or simple changes versus super hard, complex changes?
Yeah, and I think one way the FinOps foundation or the framework puts it is like crawl, walk, and run. That's another way to look at things. Maybe there are teams where you're like just beginning to crawl. You're trying to understand the spend, right? You don't even know where like the spend is going, right? Getting visibility into where your spend is going is a way to think about like crawling. And maybe a walk is like you're finding these tiny opportunities, easy effort ones or medium effort ones that mostly relies on the FinOps folks, right? Like savings plans or reservations. You don't need like a lot of engineering effort to it. It's mostly analysis heavy, but like less on the implementation side. And there's no real impact. You're not changing any instances. You're not shutting it down. You're not restarting. I would categorize that into like a walk. And then when it comes to run, it's more mature. Like you're like optimizing. You're trying to like automate things. You're removing the human in the loop. You're focused on like third-party tools that could help you automate some of those things.
Now, when it comes to building trust between these two terms, I'm thinking you're talking about what can FinOps as an org do independently, mostly, and where do you want to communicate with the eng and build that trust, right? That probably is one of the largest that I have seen when working with these large customers. So it may be related to scale too, right? So what is your thinking on how to address it?
Yeah. So again, as there's no one size fit for all, you try to understand the FinOps maturity and then try to kind of work with the engineering team, right? And support them in whatever initiatives that you can from a FinOps perspective. Building that trust would be as simple as creating meetings on a regular cadence to give them visibility into where spend is going, right? That to me itself is like a huge win, right? Because for teams that are super focused on pushing things out, they're going to pause and like inspect their costs, right? But you have that 30-minute meeting where you put together something to give them visibility. Maybe it's a monthly, maybe it's a quarterly thing. Even that to me is like a huge win. But for like teams that are like a bit more mature in adopting like optimization, it could be like working with them to find the next big thing for them. Like you're just finding opportunities for them and then they take care of it and they run with it. Right. So there's no one size fits for all, but like trying to understand where each team or each product team or each department is in their FinOps journey and then trying to work with them.
I'm seeing it's more or less as an evolution from being like okay, this is where we are wasting money to like, this is what we can do together to be more optimized, right? So when you get on, or when a pure FinOps person get on with that evolution, being a large company versus being a smaller company, doesn't matter.
Interestingly, I've worked with a small size startup, like a 20 people startup, and a mid sized company right now, which is Mimecast. And I see a lot of differences, right? Like mainly in terms of maturity, in terms of resources, right? Like the number of people you have in a startup is small. You end up wearing different hats. I was like head of DevOps, but I was doing a FinOps role on the side, which could be like 5% of what I was doing there. Versus a bigger company where you have established roles like FinOps engineer roles, and bigger companies tend to have like data centers. So the people who understand FinOps because they come from the capex perspective, they come from a procurement background, right? I do see those differences, but I also see other barriers like introducing new tools. Like how does play out in a startup versus a bigger company? The barrier to entry to new tools, something I felt like interesting. The number of people involved, your stakeholders. In one way, having a smaller group helps because it's easy to get something going. On the other hand, in a bigger company, you're like waiting it out more formally, right? Like you're making sure the security is intact, the performance is intact, and when you're trying to adopt new tools, right? That's some of the differences I see between like startups and bigger organizations, and
Got it.
scalability is another factor too. Like you're doing things at scale at bigger arcs. Like one person cannot handle all the teams or know about all these services. And I think of FinOps as your like cloud spend is growing. I think of FinOps person like specializing in compute for FinOps or like storage for FinOps, because they need to know the technical details. Like somebody could have like a great background in databases and they could like do an amazing job at FinOps in optimizing databases for that company cloud. Like, because when you see databases, there are like 10 different types of databases just in AWS, and they could be a specialist in that. Versus someone who's like more familiar with like hardwares and instance types and containers, and they could do an amazing job at like compute, like solving challenging stuff for like optimizing compute.
So generally in those conversations, right, I'm going to wear the engineering hat now. Okay. So generally when I go into such a meeting, one thing I'm always scared is, am I going to see a lot of the resources that I am wasting or my team is wasting? So it generally becomes a conversation between us working together too. Like, yeah, you are pointing out things that I'm wasting. So how do we handle that? What is your advice to a FinOps person to really convey that message clearly, which is actionable, right? And another aspect there is, in most cases I've seen, these recommendations could fail based on the application that's being handled, right? Maybe there is seasonality there. Maybe there's a specific application affinity there. Maybe the edge team is right. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, I've been in that role of like wearing the engineering hat, right? So there's always that unknown why change something that's in a stable state.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
why risk changing something? What happens to performance? What happens to your reliability of the applications because you're going by something that FinOps suggested to change something? The way I see it is kind of like an iron triangle, right? Like you have quality on top, there's the cost aspect to it, and then there's time and speed, right? Like sometimes you're focused on delivering things at speed, you ignore the cost or sometimes even quality, which I would recommend. Sometimes you focus more on quality over cost, right? So because of that, mostly engineering teams are focused on like pushing features out.
I see.
They tend to compromise on the cost aspect of it, and they're more focused on quality and speed of things, right? And FinOps and optimization comes as an afterthought. Like my cost went up, now I'm trying to optimize. Kind of figuring out what your balance is, and maybe even adding that cost aspect as early as your architectural specification, like your architecture. The way I see it is how performance and security has become like first class citizens when talking about architecture. You tend to think about performance when you're figuring out your architecture spec, even before implementation, right? That's the way I'm seeing FinOps evolve as well. Like, consider cost optimization as part of your architecture spec, the shift left paradigm, basically.
So this is where I'm sure you're passionate about the AI aspect of things, right? Any recommendation for that matter is talking about your current state and a new state, right? And I don't think without AI, there is anything else that can evaluate the new state 100%, right? Even FinOps, right? So the new state is still an unknown. So there is a little bit of risk there going from A to B because B is unknown to me. In fact, B is unknown to the whole room, right? FinOps, Eng, no one knows. How can we make sure that B is at least known and measurable and we know what we are going to get when we get to B, right? Cost is very clear. It's going to go down $100 to $50. Very, very clear.
Yeah.
Can we somehow get to a discrete or a definitive answer even before starting the journey?
The way I see AI in FinOps evolve is kind of like twofold. One for like forecasting purpose.
Uh-huh.
Right now it's like companies no longer have a single cloud account, right? They have multiple
Correct.
cloud accounts to having multiple cloud providers, right? Like, most of them rely on GCP plus Azure or like a combination of some cloud providers. And so forecasting becomes tricky, and I see AI to be super helpful from that aspect. In terms of cost optimization itself, where I see real value for AI to come in is right now, at least for me, it's like a manual process to identify, change, like for example, changing instances, like moving to Graviton. Graviton would save you like 20% and have better performance, right? And AWS advertises that. They give you great tools to even give you a list of instances that you could update from A to B, right? But that's still a manual thing to go and hunt that down and then share it with your engineering team so that you action it. And as you mentioned, there's always that risk involved, like what happens to performance, what is going to be my downtime if I change instances, right? I think that's another interesting place where like AI could help out, like, finding those opportunities. Maybe there's like a co-pilot sort of an aspect to it where it gives you the parameters on like, your performance is not going to get affected because these are like similar instances. And this is how much you end up saving. And this is what your downtime would be. And maybe even finding what is the right time to update your instance so that you have a lower impact to customers. Feeding in all of those data and getting that recommendation out takes a lot of time away from the human to analyze these different aspects, and then kind of like AI just helping you out and finding that right time, right thing to do.
Coming back to the scale aspect of things, right? There are startups and there are mid-sized companies and there are extremely large companies, right? And personally at Sedai, we have worked with $500 million cloud cost companies, right? Cloud cost as in like you manage $500 million for some companies, right? And culture is very different from that to really startup. Right?
Yep.
Now, for you, when you've gone through the journey, how can a FinOps team succeed in all three places? How can one succeed in a startup environment? What is required for a mid-size, and what exactly is required for a large enterprise? And what's the difference?
Yeah. So in the startup world, I think what is interesting is things change fast, right? So your approach kind of needs to adapt to that. For example, reserving an instance for 3 years may not make sense because either you're going to scale or like the project may not go anywhere and you might shut it down in like 3 months. And so your approach there could be different there. And usually people tend to wear like multiple hats in the startup environment, so you may not even have like a FinOps role. Specifically, someone in IT or like DevOps are like taking care of the FinOps side of things from the cloud perspective. So maybe start small, right? Like find those easy wins. So that's where I would start in the startup world. Don't think go all in and try to like save the maximum. Maximum savings could be like a 3-year all upfront savings plan or reserved instance.
Yep.
Which in theory gives you the maximum savings, but in reality, you don't want to take that risk of like committing to something for 3 years, especially if your startup is early in the journey. In a mid-sized company or larger organization, the way I tend to see things is building those relationships with different team, understanding the products and understanding the services, right? And start with the people, the trust, the relationship first, and then move on to understand what kind of maturity they have. Like, some teams are great in optimize as you go model, right? Like they are pretty much cost aware and what they are running and what services they are using. And other teams are like super focused on delivering the products, right?
Mhm.
So finding that relationship and adjusting to what they really need at that point of time, right? So
Mhm.
that's one thing. For really, really large arcs, which have not worked, but I have an idea of what, as a FinOps person, right? It's harder to build that relationship with like 30 teams, right? Or 40 teams as you grow in that scale. So mostly focused on finding the right tools and enabling teams to do things for themselves, right? So I think that's where I would focus on, because it's kind of like pushing FinOps to the engineering teams, down to the engineering teams. You're kind of like an enabler. You're kind of like a collaboration between finance and engineering teams and product teams at that point, right? Your role kind of like shapes a little bit differently. You may not be at a point to help out like technically in each and every
Yep.
FinOps initiative, but kind of enabling them and kind of like being in a advisory role or a consult role to help these teams to do the right thing would be a great thing to do.
One other topic that always, whenever I have discussions with teams, is anomaly in cloud costs, right? There are sudden spikes and nobody expected. Maybe they turned on some logging
Yeah.
and inadvertently things went south, and that creates a lot of tension, right? And there are tools addressing it, but what would be your advice to avoid that? Once you find one, how do you make sure that it doesn't get repeated, right? And generally, how do you calm everyone down, saying, you know what, it's a one-time incident, it's done.
Yeah, the spikes are always interesting, especially in crosslinks. It happens to everyone at some point in time, and then you think about like creating alerts, right?
Yeah.
Until a spike happens, you don't really think about, I need
Yeah.
alerts for spikes. So it's probably something that everybody has experienced at some point of time. A bunch of tools that helps us, like AWS provides cost alerts as part of like the billing and cost management, right? Like you could set alerts based on service, so like a percentage of your spend, or like daily spikes if your threshold goes compared to previous day, or like a moving average. There are different parameters that you could use to set these alerts, or like even a budget, right? You're crossing 80% over your budget for the month. Different sort of alerting that AWS offers. I also like the alerts from the cost intelligent dashboards, like the Kudos dashboards that AWS offers. Those are dashboards that you could deploy to AWS QuickSight, and they are like pre-built dashboards that gives a range of like recommendations and insights into your spend. You could click on any of those charts or like numbers and then like create an alert of it. You could even like create a PDF report and have it emailed to you. So those to me are like super helpful. A little bit more detail or more, you can go in the weeds compared to what the Cost Explorer or like the alerts from the cost management in AWS console.
Delay play a role there. If the alerts are a little delayed, that's one thing I've heard from customers, right?
Yeah.
We can send those alerts. Sometimes they come after my spike has happened, and that creates another set of problems. Is there any way to address that?
There are some third-party tools that you could, helps you forecast things and find anomalies based on your patterns. Like you see a slow increase on like something happening over a period of time, and then like there could be some tools that could detect those. And I also feel that's another area where like AI could come into play. I've played around with Amazon Q, which is like a Gen AI capability on top of QuickSight. You could use something like those to find those anomalies. But again, this goes back in time, right? Like it doesn't really go forward. but maybe you could use that to predict what could happen, like what kind of services
I
are
see. I see.
prone to having spikes, right? Like if you have spikes in the past, like what are the chances of having spikes in this service and this account, in future, right? Like kind of like coming up with a risk model.
You were in engineering before and you made a switch to FinOps, right?
Yes.
What was the primary reason? And your own journey, that will probably help most of us a lot. So what was your journey? How did you make that switch and how was it seamless? I know it was seamless.
Yeah, so I had my master's in computer science and engineering, and I specialized in intelligent systems. Like I had like courses like AI and ML.
Uh-huh.
My first job was in MathWorks and the Boston area. They're like the makers of MATLAB and Simulink. I was primarily working in quality engineering, so I've held like different roles. That's where my background in like reducing waste, going lean, those kind of principles are ingrained in me from my first job. And then I moved to a startup based out of New York, worked with some amazing people. I was leading DevOps and I was handling a little bit of IT over there. So for me, the FinOps journey started there in cutting costs in AWS, not just in AWS, but also looking at other tools that the startup was using, consolidating similar tools, cutting down licenses that we no longer need, those sort of things. And to me, all of those, I was actually doing the FinOps work without knowing it was called FinOps, right? So, and then I came to the realization there is a framework out there. There's a community of FinOps folks out there. There's a growing community of tools out there, right? That could help in that journey, right? So it's mostly self-taught for me, and I really enjoyed analyzing data and figuring out where to optimize. So that felt great. And I was relocating to India to be closer to family. And I started targeting FinOps role and I was getting great responses. And I found that a lot of companies realizing the need for like cloud FinOps roles. And so I felt like good demand was there for it. And there was a growing sense of community, the FinOps Foundation as a community. And that's when I started getting certified. Like I got certified as FinOps practitioner. I'm in the process of getting certified as a FinOps professional as well. So that growing community and growing sort of a sense of like amazing tools out there gave me a sense that it's a growing space, right? So and I enjoy doing it. So that's part of like kind of my FinOps self-taught journey, like taking the best out of from each job and then like kind of moving on to the next one. Whatever experience I gained from the previous one.
That's one thing I have seen too, right? So FinOps community is probably one of the best communities that's like super supportive. And I think they have all the materials you need to be a great practitioner. So I'm super convinced. Now, Venkat, when it comes to optimization, going back to the triangle so that probably is the key to optimization. One is on one hand side is your cost, the other side is your time to delivery. The other aspect is quality and performance, right? And cost, I think practitioners clearly know this is the cost and this is what I want you guys to optimize. It's very, very clear. Now, Eng would know mostly the priority of delivery of a feature and the quality of the service both, right? Delivery of the feature, I think they know it clearly, but quality, can we use something else other than Eng to get that quality input well? In the sense, quality include performance and the user experience aspect. And if there is something that can tell you this indication, you have all the input from your FinOps guys on this side, which is cost.
Okay. Yeah.
You have a learn system that gives you input on what would be the quality if you make this change. And you have engine product that knows the priority of your delivery, right?
Yeah.
If we bring all these three together, can we get a better system?
Yeah. I also feel like what might be missing there is like your user numbers, like your customer growth, right? So that brings an interesting aspect. As your user number grows, right, your number of customers grow, and you're maintaining quality or improving quality, you have less bugs, better performance, better SLAs, and your cost either stays the same or goes down or like increases by a predictable number in proportion to your user growth, right? That to me is like a great KPI for me, like a great metric to look at, right? Your predictable growth in cost you have based on how your user or customer growth is, and you're not compromising the quality, or you're trying to improve, and you're trying to meet the deadlines, or like you're around the deadlines, right? So I think that's one way to look at it.
Now, when it comes to the recommendations, right? Let's divide again that to three, right? So you have resource-based recommendations, like you are wasting this compute, or this is not the right compute for you. In fact, cloud providers can give you most of it, right? And the second is your finance recommendations. I think that's best done by FinOps guys, right? It's extremely hard for even cloud providers to tell you that this is the right plan for you. It might appear to be the cheapest plan, but that may not be the best plan for you, right? And the third aspect is really the business growth aspect, which product knows well, right? Now, if you bring all the, but unfortunately or fortunately, FinOps take decisions on almost all three.
Right.
And you need support. You will fail if these two components don't support you well, right? So that's your fortunate/unfortunate situation. You need support from both, and you're trying to convince both. Now, what is your suggestion to gain that support? I completely understand building that relationship really helps, but to gain that support, that this is super important, and this is how we can execute. And if you execute, this is where we're going to be. How can you build or get that support from them?
Yeah, I think kind of like showing visibility into each teams, like from finance perspective, you need those cost per unit cost to serve numbers to show them, and how like something that you do on the engineering side, how you optimize things can impact your unit cost to serve, and in turn increase your profit margins, right? So maybe finance cares about that. For someone in the product teams, and again, you approach them giving visibility into that data. And for engineering as well, the more you reduce waste, I think they care about reducing waste from that perspective. So I think the way you work with each teams and what they care about changes, and kind of working with everyone on that aspect helps.
Got it. Clear. So let me switch. This is going to be, I'm going to put you in an uncomfortable situation. Let's ask an uncomfortable question. Right? People generally don't talk about failures, right? And I generally celebrate that. So that generally is the deal, right? So otherwise, there is no way you can win. So I know you do as well. From what I've heard from you, there are cases where we failed miserably with an initiative, and you don't want to make that mistake again, right? So do you have an instance like a category? Right. I don't want that exact example, a category of things that did not really work well when you're trying this by a different way now.
Yeah, I think jumping in too fast into things, especially in FinOps initiatives, I think that's, I fail. I think you fail, you learn from your failures, right? Jumping in too fast, things like, trying to reserve instances without thinking into the future a lot. Those are one category that I can think of. The adoption of tools is another category. Like you want to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time, and the tool is going to help you in that FinOps journey, right? And the way I see tools is it may not help you 100% of the time, but is that 50% of the time if it helps you in certain cases. And what does that translate to? Is it going to save you time? Is it going to save you money? Where is it helping you in the FinOps journey? Like that selection of tools, make sure you look into different factors and trying to figure out like what tool makes sense, right? And where it is helping the FinOps journey. Like you jump in too quick, maybe something is too flashy, you pick it, and then you cannot go back because you're like maybe tied to it for a certain amount of time, right? But on the other hand, there are tools that could maybe work only for 20% of the use cases, but save you quite a lot of money, right? So there's no right answer there. Like sometimes experimenting is worth worth trying out. Like maybe you experiment with the new tool for some amount of time, then think about full adoption.
I see. That's a great thought. So when it comes to adopting a tool, build versus buy, right? So generally people consider it should be built. Maybe we know all the details, or should we buy, right? What would be your suggestion there?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the build versus buy paradigm, right? Again, there's no one answer to everything. If you have the time and money, maybe build it. If not, get something more mature, buy it. That's my approach. And in some cases, it doesn't make sense. Even if you have the time and money, it may not be your business to build that, right? Like maybe your business is to do something else, right? So in that case, you don't want to build a tool that deviates from your like core principles of the company or what you're trying to sell. You're kind of like diverting your resources to something else, because building comes with maintenance, building comes with other overheads as well. But there are like smaller tools that like, helper tools, utility tools. You don't need to like totally rely on buying every single small tools, right? Maybe there's like something quick that you could spin up that'll help you, in analyzing something or like figuring out something. The helper tools that will help you automate something like that you've been doing manually, right? You don't have to spend a lot of time in trying to research and find what to buy in those cases. Maybe you use that time to build, right? Maybe something small that'll help you in your, whether it's an engineering effort or in your FinOps journey, or, tiny things that could help you along your way, right? Maybe those are good examples where you can build it, but in a more mature sense, you don't want to be in the business of like building UI for things that that's not your core business, basically.
Now, what are the three big challenges, right? Biggest, maybe two or three big challenges that you see in this journey. FinOps adoption / FinOps maturity / getting the cost optimized. What are the three main challenges?
I think for me, it's for first, I would start with the role itself, like, kind of advertising FinOps role in companies. I still feel like FinOps is much early. We're very early in the journey, like having a FinOps role in a lot of companies. I think companies are like now trying to realize the real need for like having a dedicated FinOps person, right? Traditionally, I feel like FinOps roles have been someone who has been part of like finance, who have like pretty great like finance background, but less on the technical side of things, or they come from a data center procurement capex background. They're pretty great, like they understand FinOps, they understand the FinOps frameworks, but maybe have like less background in the cloud side of things, right? And then I also see the third category where like the cloud FinOps folks, who have that DevOps background as well, like who understand the numbers, who understand how the cost and usage aspect work in different AWS services, and then also how to optimize things, looking at things in detail, right? So that to me itself is a challenge, kind of like educating where the FinOps role fits in, having a central FinOps team, how FinOps can help finance, help business side of things, how they can help engineering, right? So that here to have widespread adoption of the FinOps role itself, and the FinOps foundation, the frameworks, what's out there, the community, and all of that play a big role in that sense. That's one thing. The other thing is optimization always comes as an afterthought. And to think of cost as, okay, my cost went up and I have to reduce. I think shifting that mindset and shifting left, like much earlier in the game, like as I mentioned earlier, like have it as first-class citizen as compared to performance and security as part of your design, right? Like you're designing a new product, you want to think about the different options out there. AWS has like 5 different types of databases or 10 different types of databases, and you can run compute in EC2 or ECS or EMR, and each has a cost implication to it. Like thinking from those sense right ahead, like which makes sense and what are the cost implications of each one of them much earlier in the game. I think shifting that ideology much earlier in the game is another challenge that I'm seeing.
Got it. So basically defining the role, making sure that we clarify what needs to be done. And the second is optimize early, not an afterthought. Right? Clear.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to a new person taking this role, right? Starting this journey, a company starting this journey, what would be the right way to start? What would be the right way to make progress? What are the right methods that you can measure to make sure that you are making progress? And when do you celebrate? Like, when do you call yourself or the FinOps all successful?
Yeah, I would say for companies starting having an early FinOps journey, right? Like, or they just create a role and they don't know what FinOps is, or like they want to have someone dedicated to look into the cloud spend, right?
Right.
Maybe start small, like understanding where your spend is going. I do a lot of analysis. Like I just rip apart like the top 10 services, top 10 accounts, slice and dice the data, and just for you to understand like where the costs are going. That itself is a huge win, right? Like creating that visibility. So you're not even like starting to cut cost or optimize, but you're like creating visibility into where your spend is going, right? So I would start something somewhere from there, and then look into those smaller wins, right? Initially I talked about those low effort ones, medium effort ones, and high effort ones, right? The low effort ones, the way I see it, is things that don't need engineering effort. Like, you could analyze your spend and you can come up with savings plan, reservations, right? Those mostly are tied to FinOps folks. Like it's analysis heavy, and then you go through an approval process of some sort, and the implementation is probably just on FinOps person. Like you don't need like a lot of engineering effort. You need that buy-in, but like you don't need you're not changing anything in engineering or infrastructure to get that done, right? So I would start with something smaller in the high impact, low effort scenarios.
I can give you an example of such a thing. It's I'm thinking, are you mostly heading in that direction? High impact, low effort change.
Correct. Yeah. So start with that, and then maybe move on to high impact, medium effort ones. Right. Medium effort ones could be something like you're changing your storage tiers in S3, or you're cleaning up files that you're no longer needed, right? Or you're shutting down instances that's not been running for a while, or like that's the usage is pretty low, right? You don't need you're not going to have a real impact on the product. Like if you're cleaning up files that you're absolutely sure that you don't need, or
Exactly.
like look at like last 6 months worth of data, and there's an EC2 instance that has like very, very minimal CPU or memory usage, then maybe just shut it down, right? So those kind of things fall under the medium effort ones. For me, you need some inputs from the engineering team, but you could help them out. Those are like still quick wins for me. And the high effort category, I would think of things like architectural changes, like you're changing the scaling parameter, you're moving from EC2 to containers and ECS, or like you're using a totally different technology which is more cost effective, right?
And the role of DevOps, FinOps, and engineers, right? So they're considered very distinct. And now with IAC and generally the movement, I think they are all almost coming together, right? Because they are all working towards getting it done, right? Let's get it done. That's a goal. Now, can you frame a different goal than cost optimization for FinOps, or is that the only goal?
No, I would expand in FinOps to be a little bit more than just cost optimization. For example, you could do forecasting, right? Like you type business teams, product teams, take a look at the forecast for like usage into the future, and then you kind of like predict what your cloud spend is going to be. So that's another important piece of what FinOps do, right? That's one thing. And I also see FinOps to be more than just cloud, right? Like when we think about FinOps, we always think about, I'm optimizing something and it's usually in cloud, right? It may not be in cloud. Maybe you're migrating something that's not in cloud into cloud, right? Or like,
I see.
or it could be another tool that's deployed in cloud, their own cloud, and maybe you're like downsizing that, or like you're optimizing the licenses, and that you're negotiating the the renewal or contract for those something else other than like your cloud providers, right? Some other SaaS tool that your company is using. You're optimizing that to me is FinOps as well. Like you're optimizing not just in cloud, for other SaaS tools as well.
Perfect. So thank you so very much for being here. It was really great talking to you. I love the triangle analogy that you gave us. I think that'll be a good way to look at all the individual significant parameters that one should consider. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to talking to you again.